everyone. This is In Focus by Seven Wonders. Today we have Brent Comstock on the program, entrepreneur, agency extraordinaire. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
First question, as a Tar Heel, how does it feel to have Bill Belichick announce the news this week?
We are renaming the university. It is now the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. But it's very interesting, and I'll be curious to see. Growing up in Nebraska, there's a lot of football history. Moving to North Carolina, where, is a basketball school, I think, there's a chance that we're a basketball and football school now. I'll be at one of the first games, hopefully, to see next fall what that looks like.
That's awesome. UNC, if I'm not mistaken, is playing in the Wasabi Fenway Bowl. And this year, Wasabi is one of our clients. And we just interview that we had right before your interview was with Mike, who's the CMO of Wasabi. And so he was telling us a little bit about how, because it was pre the Belichick announcement. So he was like, if this happens, we're going to have to do a PR whole thing, switcheroo for this event. So anyway, pretty wild. But getting into the actual questions. So you started BCom at age 12. I've heard a little bit of this story, but I'm so curious. Did you have an entrepreneurial drive your whole life? How did this journey begin?
Yeah, great question. Something that I think has been part of this journey the whole time is this relentless drive to not give up and to win, almost to a fault. I named the company after myself because I was 12, and that probably should have died a long time ago. It was cute when I didn't have a college degree and a team. So yeah, I started in a small town in rural southeast Nebraska. We've evolved in a lot of different ways. I think that probably the constant through line has been that relentless about problem solving and that desire to make an opportunity better for the people we work with, the people that we work for. And at age 12, 13, 14, 15, that was websites and tech stuff for people in southeast Nebraska. At age 29, with a team across the country that's building media and digital fundraising campaigns for nonprofits. We work with brands. We also work with campaigns up and down the ballot and have raised over $100 million online for our clients since we started this iteration of the business about 10 years ago.
Wow, that's so cool. So what experiences did you have that helped you shape your success into what it is today? So you were saying you started the company when you were 12. What helped you, the company's transformed a lot too. What made you decide to transform the company too as you grew?
Yeah, so my dad is a plumber. My mom was a special education teacher. And from that, I learned a few things. Number one, the value of hard work. And number two, that I didn't want to be a plumber. So from an early age, that idea of building something and that it's not going to be handed to you has been kind of the driving force. And my parents came both from backgrounds of a lower class income and family and had a variety of circumstances to get to where they are. And they paid for their own way to go to school. They built a successful business together. They've been married for 35 some years. My sister and I are very fortunate, but we were never handed anything. I think a lot of people, you hear a lot of these stories where someone was positioned in the right place at the right time, or they inherited something. And I'm not shitting on that, because if you get it, great, congratulations. I didn't get it. And so, I think the value of hard work is something that unfortunately seems to be less common in the world these days. And I think a lot of people try and take shortcuts, and we have not done that at this company. And I think that's why you find, people saying, oh my God, I've worked with you for 12 years. And I think that type of mentality has served us well, because we didn't have venture backing. We, have never been in debt. And a lot of that was because of that drive to win and that drive to make things better for the people that we work with.
That's awesome. So you said fundraising, websites, and I'm just trying to get for the audience of people who don't know BCom as well as we know BCom to learn a little bit more about exactly what you all do.
Yeah. So we often tell people that we're an outcomes-oriented media strategy agency. So we raise money online for nonprofits and political campaigns through ad campaigns, email fundraising, text message fundraising. And then we also work with a lot of corporate partners, Fortune 1 and 200 companies, on outcome-oriented comms, messaging, media. We do a lot of work in conservation in the renewable energy space, helping companies for-profit, corporations build sustainable projects, renewable energy projects in parts of rural America, which is fun because our core founding was built in rural America. And why do we do that? Well, those companies, if done right and if partnered in the correct way with, the company wins because obviously they're for-profit and they exist to make money, but the community also wins. And so we leverage our political expertise and our kind of persuasion and outcome-oriented mindset to say, okay, how do we get to a win for our client and how do we get to a win for the community that they're going to serve? And in some of these cases, it's not like we're making a video campaign and saying, oh, that was cute, thanks for the 50 grand that you spend on the video. It's okay, our work and the messaging and the strategy that we put together allowed this community to pilot a $500 million project that is going to deliver $1 million a year to public schools in that community. That's real impact. That's an outcome that helps people that you would never think from a marketing and like ad PR perspective, like, oh, that my work can have that tangible of an outcome. And the reason that we do that for corporations and for-profit entities is because that's what we do for political campaigns. They hire us because they need to win. And it doesn't really matter if you lose at the end. It doesn't matter if you had the best PR campaign or not. They still write that you lost. And so taking that same mindset, that campaign mindset, and putting it into for-profit companies, a lot of them really like that because we're not stale, we're not stagnant, and we're not the marketing company that comes in and says, oh, sign your retainer and I'll kiss your ass again when it's time to renew your contract.
That's such an interesting perspective to have, like taking the political campaign mindset and applying it in for-profit scenarios. The main overarching purpose of this podcast is about storytelling and what role that has in brand building. So can you talk a little bit about what lessons you've learned in telling stories to encourage action?
I think the first thing is you have to get to the point of the story in the first 10 seconds. I often tell our candidates, and a lot of the work we do in the political space or in the corporate space is digital centric. The nuanced things like, okay, you have to tell your story, but if the social ad is on mute, how do you like capture their attention? But even more so than that, if you are trying to persuade someone with your story and you can't get them on board in the first 10 seconds, or at least get them more interested, what are you doing, right? Like in the case of persuading people, like I always tell people a great politician or a great company can tell a narrative and a story that makes the listener feel that they are part of it, whether they are or aren't. And so that invites this idea that it's just as much their story as it is the person telling it. And I think a lot of times people will start with background or context that is helpful to have, but like you've got to pull people in. And we live in a world where, I have 500 tabs open on my computer. And if I hadn't snoozed notifications, I'd probably be looking in the top right-hand corner the whole time. You've got to really pull people in with those stories. And it's hard, especially in outcome-oriented work that we do, because a lot of it's edgy too, right? Like if you're a political campaign, you're probably either for or against the person talking. If you're a corporation, like ones that we work with, like renewable energy companies, people have very strong opinions about these types of things. And so you have to be able to cut through the noise quickly, both to excite the people that are already on your team, to not piss off or dissuade the people who might be able to be on your team, and also to build some sort of commonality even with the people that are against you.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So interesting. Yeah. The way you're telling these stories. So it's like a lot of these stories are controversial then to some degree. It sounds like.
Oh, politics. Everyone is totally united and we are all aligned.
But do you try to tread a line of being appealing to people on the other side, or do you go for more of the polarization strategy with your campaigns where it's like, let's double down on the things we're good at and that people know about?
Yeah, look, we're unapologetic about the work we do. And so I think our political work that we do is very much center left for a variety of reasons. One, political campaigns don't really, and the machine that is the American political system doesn't really like people dabbling on both sides. And it's not really built for that, right? Like you pitch to people that are running in competitive races that are backed by committees that are one side or the other. It's really hard to do that on the electoral kind of candidate front. We have worked with people on the other side. We are not opposed to working with people on the other side on certain issues. Where we do spend a lot of time and where we have a team that is made up of Democrats, Republicans, Independents. We have some people on our team that don't touch the political work we do because we have corporate clients and nonprofit clients. I think what's interesting, one is back to what I said at the start about being unapologetic about the work we do, but also a lot of the work that we are doing in rural communities. I mean, those people are not Democrats. I mean, the work that we're doing in rural rural communities to get renewable energy projects. Those are all Republicans. And so we work across, spectrums to win for our clients. Like the question is, what does the client need to get to a win? If we're not pitching someone who's getting backed by Donald Trump for US Senate, it's not to say that someone else can, but we're just not pitching it. But we will work with those people when there's a solar or hydrogen facility that's being brought in, or we do a lot of fundraising. If a nonprofit rural art museum comes and says, hey, we want to raise money and leverage your digital tactics to raise money for that, we'll sign up for that. And hell yeah, we'll work with people on the other side. And I think that's candidates for office will often say after we've been hired and I ask what was the deciding factor, a lot of them will say, well, the fact that you're not lodged in DC or New York is one reason. We're Nebraska based. We have a remote team across the country, but we know how normal people out of the Beltway, as they say in DC, out of the Beltway think. We've touched grass today. And then on the inverse side, for-profit clients will hire us because everything is political now. Look at the Bud Light Pride Month kind of crisis of last year or 2 years ago. Those are the types of things, as someone who works in the political space, I think about night and day and wake up, panic, thinking could something like that happen? Corporate marketing and for-profit companies, they previously, and a lot of them still aren't wired to think that way. And it's not a particularly glamorous way to think in crisis mode all the time. But that's why for-profit companies hire us, because we know how the political system works. We also know how voters think. And there's one thing to market to a consumer a trinket or a product or a retail or CPG or something like that. It's another to sell to that same group of people the idea that they need to vote for someone. You're selling a person, buy this vision. And that's a lot harder. So a long-winded answer to say we work on both sides, but just in different client contexts. And we have grown, people have said, oh, you're going to have to solely pick a side or not.
Brent, a lot of the folks that listen to this podcast are brand marketers that are embedded at brands, on the internal side. What are some pieces of advice that you might have for those folks as they try to wrestle with some of these challenges, even if they're not in your space at all, but just kind of thinking through, especially as the new year approaches, what are most important things to think about? I know that's kind of open-ended, but I'm curious to see where you take it.
I think one thing that is a tried and true thing, but I think it's getting increasingly harder to keep focused, is go where you're best suited to go and don't feel the need to oversaturate everywhere else. And I think that a lot of times new is seen as the silver bullet that fixes things, whether it's a new social platform or whether it's a new style of content creation. There's something to be said about testing and iterating, building a profile or some sort of strategy in a new place just to test it out. But I think those people that really double down on what works and don't spread themselves too thin, brand marketing, particularly the in-house people, God love you, because you're never done. And so I think there's this constant pull that, we need to be doing the next newest thing. And we refresh our client list every election cycle. So we're always working with new. But I just think that that is consistent. And the reason I bring that up is I have joined and been subscribed to a billion different professional development things for marketing, right? At the end of the day, we do market, we market candidates, we market those things. I still go back to some of those original books, the physical, actual books that have information and things like that. And I think that that's just because they can span time and generation and things like that. And the other thing that I would say is for those people that are in the brand marketing space, particularly internal, there's certainly a ton of autopsies being done in the political environment right now. But it is really fascinating to look at how both sides, not just, one side, how both sides leverage that in such a short, condensed vacuum and to see what works and what didn't, because we do a fair amount of work with startup companies as well. And one of the things that I tell people is a startup in a political campaign, there's not a lot that's different. You have a short window of time to prove yourself. You are always wanting more money than you have. And when you get the money, then you have to figure out am I the dog that caught the car? And where do I spend this? And if I overspend somewhere and I win, well, hell yeah, I won. But if I overspend and I lose, then you got the stories that are being written about the losing side about where did they spend all this money? And so I think there's something, just having worked on political campaigns a lot, I do think that there's something interesting to look at, not because of the politics side of it, but because the time constraint, the budget constraint, and the forced reality that you have to reach a lot of people quickly is worth looking at.
Yeah, that's really interesting. When you measure your success, I know you said you're like very results oriented. Obviously, at the end of the day, if your clients raise the money, that's great. But what are your metrics of success for a campaign when you create a campaign?
I mean, if it's a digital fundraising client, which could be, a nonprofit, that could be a political campaign, it's did we raise the money that we said we were going to raise? And we have a projection model that we use that identifies what assets are we working with? Where do we need to go? What do we need to invest to get there? What's the return on spend? It's the same, as a normal marketing campaign. The difference is the dollar it's really easy to track. Like my dollar and your dollar are the same dollar. And so if I need to raise $1 million, it doesn't really matter if it's yours or mine. It just needs to go into my client's bank account. So if it's fundraising, like that's an easy win. Like did the client and the firm agree on an amount, and did we hit it at the right spend levels? On the persuasion side of things, the big grand goal is like, did you win the election? And if you did, well, great. Then they write stories about you and you get nominated for awards. If you lost, one, you're a loser. But also, like, there are things to look at, both from a campaign standpoint, but also just like from a digital and from our side standpoint. So from a campaign standpoint, you could look at things like voter turnout and things like that. And so that's where you have people like Joe Biden ran for president 3-4 times. And so like certainly it worked better the 2020 time than it did in 86 or whenever the first time he ran was, right? So you can look at like, did we win in these places and not in this? And so there's data to look at. But at the end of the day, did you win or lose? On the digital side, something that we can look at are things like, okay, let's say we ran a CTV spot on Hulu targeting moms in suburbs that are Republicans, but are also pro-choice. Okay, well, did the voter turnout in suburban blank city, did they vote for our candidate? And if yes, what's the efficacy and kind of correlation to those that received our ad? You still lost though, but maybe they run again, or maybe you get hired for the next campaign. And, like we have one district that we've worked in that unfortunately, maybe we're the problem, that we've had 3 or 4 candidates run, and it's a really hard district. It's a really hard race, but we use that learning. It's not like we run the campaign, oh, you lost, goodbye. The next campaign hires us. We forget that we worked on it. Oh, okay. No, we look at it and we go, okay, what worked here before? Let's do more of that. What didn't work? Let's get rid of that. And, we see improvements. Someone went from being 11 points down in a district to being 4. Like you don't get that by just waking up. And so there's a lot that goes into that that's within our control. But at the end of the day, it kind of sucks if they lose, because then you got to find a new client.
Yeah. Well, on that same vein, how involved are you all with campaign messaging? Obviously, there's like a decent portion of if someone's elected is due to the messaging. Do you use like data analytics to involve some of the messaging to the audience, or is that completely from the politician side and it's just your job to be the megaphone?
It depends on the campaign. I mean, ideally, the message is built by the candidate and then the team. And the team is usually a pollster, research, TV and paid spend like TV, radio, usually direct mail, and then digital and fundraising. And so in a perfect world, if you're starting early enough and you've got your team assembled, which not a lot of candidates have their teams assembled when they announce, that's like, scramble. But in a world where you have that all together, right, you can go in with research from what's worked before and what's not worked. If you've got money and you've got polling, ability to assess what is important to the electorate, and then you have all of those people that come together and they represent the different areas. So broadcast and radio reaches a different group of people than social, and social reaches a different group of, and so while the message can be adjusted for those outlets, you can all kind of work together to align on what's the best messaging, and frankly, what's the thing that's going to break through the noise the most in inboxes, mailboxes, TV commercials, billboards, yard signs, those types of things.
So earlier you made a connection between the for-profit clients that you have and the political campaigns that you work on, and how they're not that different. Some of the challenges that you learn from in the campaign side of things really inform the corporate clients that you work with. For folks who are in the brand marketing space in non-political environments, what are the lessons that you can take from the political scenarios that you work in that you think could be useful or helpful to those individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first thing to take away is to always assume that people can spin or assume the worst for a message and test it that way, right? Because in politics, it's like you want to win. And so people, I'm not saying it's our clients, but people are willing to really stretch something in an effort to get their side ahead. And I think from a brand marketing perspective, it's a little less evasive, hopefully, and a little less cutthroat. But at the same time, it's like take a message or take something that you're planning and then think the worst and the most, like how could they manipulate that in a way that could work against you? And hopefully with a good, strong, solid message, you will massage and test that in a way that like it's not penetrable. In a world where you don't test it, I think then you run into things where like, you look at a brand campaign and you're like, oh my God, what is that? Or it gets taken out of context, or it doesn't take into account cultural competencies. So I think that's one thing, because that's literally 80% of what we do. We think is like, okay, not only does it work for us, but more importantly, like it's not going to give the opposition any more ammunition, because at the end of the day, you're trying to win. The second component in just the concise, shortened window that you have to market and to tell a story, and that the most important thing has to be at the front end. And I think that in a political campaign, sometimes people get that all the time, but I would say a lot of times the hard part is the reason the campaign world is what it is because these candidates go away, they get elected, they go do work, and maybe messaging evolves, maybe they didn't have a good message, and then they come back and they run for re-election, and you find these people that are like not polling well, or they're at risk for losing. And it's like 80% of the job is messaging what you are doing, and do it in a way that not only proves that you're doing the job, but that they remember that you were the one that did the job. And so it's like, as you're thinking about brand marketing, like how do you not only get someone to trust whatever brand you are representing, but to know that you are the authority for that as well. And we've done that. I mean, we've done that for candidates, we've done it for brands. One of the things that I always tell our clients on the corporate side and nonprofit side is that whatever the goal is, if it's raising money or if it's building brand awareness or whatever, hopefully the best outcome of the entire scenario is that not only do they trust you for whatever you are marketing, whatever product, whatever thing you're doing, but that for whatever else you do, you have immediately become the authority, whether that's if you're selling products, if you're selling services, that they immediately own into the environment that you're creating. And that's how politicians get people on board with things that might be bipartisan or controversial or whatever. And that's why you see people like AOC and Trump that have similar volume of audience, right? Like a lot of people are engaged with them online. And I am quite convinced, you saw it with Trump in 16, you saw it in 20, you saw it in 24, where he can pull these weird factions of people together, and AOC can do the same thing. There's a lot of Republicans that say, I don't agree with anything that she stands for, but she motivates people to get somewhere. And I think brands can have that power. Just think about how influential that is to their bottom line too.
You mentioned having yourself as an individual or yourself as a representative of the brand being inextricably linked to authority on whatever topic. That's exactly why we're seeing so many clients embrace this type of format, because as soon as you have a camera on you and you can consistently output this type of content, you start to be viewed as the person who knows what they're talking about on that topic.
Yep.
It's really interesting.
And the thing I would add to that is, I think it's funny that you say that, particularly about podcasts, because I was just talking to someone earlier, they're like, so-and-so is creating a podcast. And this particular person, I was like, okay, well, this is going to fizzle out. And my comment was like, yeah, create a podcast because you want to create a podcast, but think less about it being a podcast and more about if you had a captive audience where you could build trust and authority, who would you bring in? And they quickly realized that they were going to do white papers and not a podcast. But it was the same mindset, right? It was, okay, you're capturing attention, you're pulling people in. If you can do that and fill it in a way that brings people in that's successful, great, do that. But if there's a better way for you to build authority and trust and make your client and end user feel valued, then do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely want to share with the audience. We obviously talked a little bit about your company and some of the projects you've worked on, but want to brag on you a little bit. I know that you were just announced Forbes 30 under 30. Congratulations for that. That's awesome.
Bye. Still
Yeah,
30,
squeeze.
or still 29, not 30.
But can you just share a little bit about some of the other coolest moments through your career? Just some really cool projects and initiatives. What have some of the highlights been for you?
Well, thank you. That was definitely one of them. It was a surprise. And people were like, oh my God, you've been planning that. People on my team were like, why didn't you tell us? We could have planned socials. I found out at the same time everyone else found out. So I think there's a couple of big moments, and most of them haven't really been public, so to speak. I mean, a couple of years ago, we acquired a competitor, and the acquisition itself has been great. And, there's been plenty of bumps. We could do a podcast on things not to do in an acquisition. And I'm sure people on my team will listen to this and be like, oh, and I'm happy to contribute things that Brent could have. So we'll just skip that. But the growth component, like the stages of growth that we have had, I would say have been really summarized into three kind of like key moments. Because BCom as it is, I've started tinkering with this when I was 12. But for the last 12 years, we have been a legit business with income that's profitable, that's growing every year, year over year, and so forth. And I think working backwards, like 2 years ago to this month, doing that acquisition, that was one phase of growth where we went from being the Nebraska company with some national clients to a national company that happens to be headquartered in Nebraska. And that acquisition, we could dive into a bunch of pieces of that, but that was the strategy. There were plenty of bumps. We lost clients, we lost teammates in the process, as you would with any acquisition. We also gained a lot. And I think that was the most recent big inflection point. Prior to that, rewind a couple years back, and our current COO, we've had 2 COOs in 12 years, which I think is really either a testament to my ability to con people into staying in the job, or they're just glutton for punishment. But a couple years back, 5, 6 years back now, was when we transitioned from our first COO, who helped us get to the first 5 years of the company, to where we're going. And they were very different people. And our current COO is great. And, now we're in this phase where we're looking to bring on the kind of revenue equivalent of the COO. And so that was a big phase. And then the other one was when we made the commitment to focus on going chronologically backwards. When I graduated college, I decided to move back. And that was, I'm not going to live in Nebraska for forever. I don't plan to. I mean, I don't have a plan to leave right now, but it's not like it's a requirement with this job. But I think proving that you can build something like this and that you can get on, we've been on Inc.'s fastest growing companies list. In 2016, I was the youngest people to receive a congressional honor for economic development. And so, I'm in the congressional record, the 30 under 30 list. All of those things are nice. Half of them are pay to play. But I think the proud moments are when you can really see growth and inflection. And that's the difference between being a solo entrepreneur doing some cool shit and really building a team that people believe in, because it's bigger than a person now. Even if it is still named after me from age 12, those have been the key inflection points. And there's a lot of cool stories that have happened along the way, like doing celebrity political videos and meeting the president and those things. Those are nice. They're 10-second installments in a very, very, hard-fought journey to build what we have today.
That's so cool. Looking forward into 2025 and beyond, do you have any technologies or anything that you're really excited about using for the business? I know technology is a really hot topic right now, especially in marketing and politics too. So,
well, it would be naive to not say that the AI universe is not ever present. I think from a technology standpoint, the thing that I am asking our team a lot, we biz dev for our team. So I am usually talking to someone, trying to convince them to get on board. And what I will say is, going into next year, same thing as going into every other year, the objective, I think, is always how do you leverage the tools and the tech to match the strategy expertise? We're not selling a product. And so if you're selling a product, maybe the coolest, sexiest thing is, and I did a tour of a healthcare facility with a client a couple of months ago, and they have this dispenser that basically drug dispenses every possible combination of drugs. And you don't realize the amount of errors in the pharmaceutical industry, which is and this machine is literally taking that from, 2%, which is, I don't know, I'm totally making that up, but a small number, but still you're 2% on drugs get messed up, to none. And so in service industry and what we do, there isn't a thing like that, because we're hired for our connections in our brain. However, I think something that is exciting is leveraging tools like AI data analyses. Is instead of having to hire 4 people to comb through an ad report and tell tell us what's the most effective message, we can keep those 4 people because we shouldn't be replacing people with machines. Take those 4 people and go, you can now do 5 times the amount of work because we can put this Facebook or this Meta ad report into a machine, and in 4 minutes, it will tell us 78 ad sets have learned. And so we have a lot of folks on our team that are constantly thinking about that and coming up with ways that we encourage that. We want people to foster that sort of innovation and creativity. And then the other side of that is there's a lot of research that goes into the digital fundraising world, right? Like you're trying to get people to give money. And so I know that we have thought about this. I don't know where it is in the process, but we're leveraging those similar tools and kind of insights to go, okay, we sent probably over 500,000 unique email campaigns for political campaigns across the country. Which one raised the most? That is something that we would never have done before, because who in the hell has the time? It would take an army of people to go back through and look at that. And by that time, the next election's already over. So those are the types of things that I think are front of mind for our team.
Amazing.
Makes sense. As you know, obviously we're in the video production, video creation space. How important has video content in what you do and what you plan to do for clients moving forward?
One of our core competencies and like one of the value adds that has allowed us to, we did a strategic planning meeting this morning. So it's like on the whiteboard over there. I'm like, I will read, you are correct. But video is a tool because of the storytelling visual and audio component. It's a tool for us that allows us to kind of like, as the consultant said this morning, get in and kind of like an octopus and like an alien, like insert ourselves into a bunch of different places, because email marketing can be replaced with text marketing, and graphic illustration can be replaced with animation. But there still isn't a lot. I mean, there's plenty of things you can do to enhance it, but like the ability and the power of that and the ability to make those. So we have a creative director and a team in-house that can make that. That has been so critical to us in beating our competition and simply like being able to show quickly what we can do. I tell people all the time, the 2 easiest things to sell are digital fundraising and videography, because on digital fundraising, it's like, if you want to raise 10 million and I tell you it's going to take 2 million to get there and you have 2 million, why wouldn't you give it to me? Like, I'm going to give you 8 and like, boom, done. On the video side, it's like, hey, I made this movie. You like it? Yes, great. Hire me. You don't like it? No? Okay. Hire someone else. There's not a lot of stuff in marketing and brand that is so finite as those 2 things.
That's really interesting.
That's really interesting.
Selling video production certainly has its challenges, but I agree that Michael and I were talking about this the other day. It's like, at least you can be like, here is the thing. Whereas with marketing, it's like, well, there's these data points that will show you that it's like hard for people to wrap their heads around it.
And that's why, I mean, we still have legacy clients that we do, that they pay us we'll pay you to do social or to do like things like that. But like, we're not actively going out and pitching that. We're actively going out and pitching things that are outcome action driven, because one, I love to win, probably to the point where like I need to be checked out, but also to the point where no one wants, like, it sucks to get fired, right? There's so many marketing agencies that come and go because like, oh, I'm going to create these clients and I have this retainer. Like, what the hell's a retainer? Like, come on, you need something, you have a goal, get to the outcome, get to yes, and do it. And not a lot of firms grasp that because it's hard. I tell people all the time, every 2 years we put ourselves on at least half of our business on trial on election day and like show the world what we've got. And that doesn't work if you want to like sit back and coast.
Yeah, that's so true. It's interesting having a business that's all based around that. It's a very unique business model in that sense.
So before we wrap up, Brent, any final things that you want to say or things that you think might be valuable to our audience listening about your experience?
The one thing that I always share, because there's usually someone, hopefully someone who is a budding, aspiring brand marketer or someone who's thinking like, how do I get to next? And I would be remiss if I did not say like as an ambulance just drives by, I would be remiss if I did not say the value of mentors and learning in this. Even, I mean, I am younger, but I am also the CEO of a company. So in theory, like, I would mentor others. Well, the people that have mentored mentored me have just been the most consequential component of our success. And people like Bob Iger and Michael Bloomberg and these people that have like achieved success and have largely done it into a time frame when we would all like to be retired. And I think that you learn those anecdotes and those things from people like them, but also the person down the street who is, one or two steps ahead of you. I tell people like usually 2 steps ahead because then they've got the space between where you are and where they were. But find those people. There's no one. And if you're unwilling to, or you think that you're too old or that you are too advanced in your career, then that sucks because that means you're probably plateauing. That's how we've gotten to where we are. I have a college degree, yes, but like it wasn't the college degree that built what this is. It was the people that helped get there. And I think that there's always going to be a better brand strategy. There's always going to be a better video production company other than, obviously you guys are the best. So there's always going to be a second best. But I think that just knowing that it's easy to build imposter syndrome, but at the same time, like finding those people to help get there, like that's where I've learned 95% of how to do this. And the other 5% was largely just failing and figuring it out afterwards.
That's great advice. The mentorship piece, it's not something that in the episodes that we've recorded, we've talked a ton about. And I totally agree. And Michael and I are very fortunate to have really great mentors around us that have helped us build as well. So I think that's great advice.
Thanks for joining us today, Brent. Really enjoyed it.
Likewise. Thanks, guys.